Hello, my name is Andrew, and welcome to the first ever episode of Miniature Manifesto. I've been playing war games, painting miniatures, building miniature scenery for the better part of 20 years at this point, and I think I've picked up a few tips and tricks that maybe I could share. Not that there aren't 100 content creators on this platform doing the same thing, but who knows, maybe I've got an extra one. So today, I wanted to show you guys how to build some of my favorite wargame terrain to not only build, but play with. And that is these little miniature walls. Like that. They are my favorite way to provide cover in a game, or split up the board, or just kind of funnel an army around, whatever you want to use it for. But they give you a lot of different options for how you can structure them, and really give you some varied options for, again, just providing cover in your game. A lot of the time, base cover, not a building, not, some cool foxhole or anything, but just the base cover. It gets forgotten about, if you will. So this is my solution to that. A great way to break up the board. And like I said, just provide some cover for your troops while at the same time maintaining visual interest in everything that's going on the board. Because isn't that one of the main draws for all of us, is how realistic and visually interesting we can make these tiny little scraps of plastic. So, without further ado, let's pop over and get some of these rolling. Thanks. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is get a little box about the size we want to build our wall and some aluminum foil. I'm going to start to crunch it up here. I put it on the table first and then realized that's not really the best way to go about it. So I'm just going to pick it up and mush it together and put some little crinkles in it and all kinds of texture, and then start to flatten it out a little bit. We don't want to push all of the wrinkles out, but we do want to get it pretty flat. And then we're going to stick it down into the little box here. Biggest thing at this step is just to make sure that you've got plenty of coverage up the sides of the walls for the height of the box. It's not the end of the world if it's not, but you're going to do a lot better. And once you've done that, pull that one out, and we're going to get another sheet and push it down here in here the same way. The crumpling will kind of come naturally, so you don't have to bother crumpling it beforehand. As you can see here, it gets plenty of texture on it just from mashing it down in the box. But once we've done that, just make sure it's pushed all the way to the edges, and we're going to get some plaster. The plaster is from Home Depot, and the amount of water you need is kind of dependent on the texture you're going for. But I like to do about a half of one of these little bottles, or a 50-50 mixture, maybe a little less. We just want to make sure that we can mix it easily and we don't have any pockets of dry plaster left. It'll take a bit of stirring. I think I stirred this for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and this little swirling motion here, just going around the outside, making sure everything is pulled into the middle and in the middle out, should give you this creamy texture here. This is what we're going for. Don't worry too much about the bubbles in it. We'll get those out later. The next thing I'm going to do is pull out just some little pieces of wrapped wire that I have. I used a drill and some 14 gauge copper to make this. I can show you guys how in a later video if you want to know. And then for the other two, I'm just going to get some standard wire. I don't expect these to be exposed, and I just want them to be structural. So before we put those in, let's go ahead and put the plaster in our mold. And we're going to get it all out, or as much as we can. If you want to use a spatula to do this, it's a little easier than this popsicle stick. But once we've got it in there, we're just going to push it all the way to the sides. Make sure we've got nice even coverage, and then start tapping those bubbles out. This is going to take a while. Again, probably 3 minutes of tapping, so I sped it up here, but you're just going to, you're going to tap this. You're going to tap this boy for a while until all of those air bubbles are out. And that's probably good right there. So I'm just going to make sure that our mold is pushed all the way out to the sides, and then I'm going to start putting our little supports in here. Again, these first two are the ones I'm expecting to be exposed, and the other two are just for structure. So I'm going to drop these in the plaster, and just using a little stick, another piece of wire in this case, I'm just going to mash them down, make sure that they're set well. We don't want them all the way down, and we don't want them at the top. So I'm going to do my best to push them about halfway down into the mixture, and then I'm going to cover them up. Alright, so now that that's done, we're going to take the other piece of foil and just push it down on top. No problem though, we're just going to mash this down as best we can and try to get as many bubbles out as possible. And then we're going to let it sit for about 20 minutes. After about 20 minutes, you can come back, you can see it's not all the way cured, but it does have a good bit of structure to it. And that should allow us to turn it upside down just like so and slightly tap it out. Don't be too rough, but you can be a little forceful. And we're just going to go ahead and remove the aluminum foil and bring out the wall itself. Be careful. And now, since we're not cured all the way yet, I can just start using my fingers to kind of pick at and pull off some of these sharper edges, kind of wear everything down, and give it a more of a lived-in look, if you will. Something weathered, something that's been sitting out in the elements, getting shot up and just run down over time. You can use your finger here. Just be a little careful. You'll see here in a second I get pretty heavy with it and accidentally break it. Oh well. No problem. We were kind of planning on that anyway. I guess we'll just work with that now. So I'm just going to continue on through here, doing my best to use my finger to kind of get out all those bubbles, at least the wildly apparent ones. And once we've done that, I'm going to get this tool here. It is just a little file. Anything will work at this point. But since we've been working with this for about 5 minutes now, we are getting to the point where we can really get some realistic behavior from the surface. Once it's got a crust formed on the top and has started to dry out a little bit, you'll notice when you pull away, it does give that kind of chipping and cracking that we want from a realistic looking concrete wall. But I'll be quiet now and let you guys just watch as I chip away at this thing. So the next thing I want to do here is kind of emulate this thing taking a giant round from either a tank or maybe a Titan of some sort. The problem is when concrete gets hit or impacted, the side that's hit will leave a hole and the other side will leave something like this. So this is what I'm going to try and create here. I'm not going to do a fantastic job, but anything will do. Again, we're just going for something to look good on our table. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to start to pick out a few more pieces. I really want to expose these wires that I've put in here. And it's always really fun if you can manage to get it such that there's a piece or two kind of crumpled over or hung on with the wire inside. I was really going for that, so I'm going to score out this piece and kind of break it off. Unfortunately here, the wire that I cut just didn't extend far enough up into it to kind of hold it on. So that's what I was going for, but as you can see, I just turned it over and it fell right off. So we're just going to leave those exposed, no problem at all. And once we've done that, we're going to start chipping away at this score mark to try and make it look a little bit more realistic. And I'm just going to turn it over, do the same thing, and then move on to the piece itself. Just chip away at the side. Again, we're making it look like it got hit by bullets and it's been sitting out in the middle of a 41st millennium battlefield for gosh knows how long. So I'm just going to start to clean up the relatively untouched sides and add some more bullet holes. The biggest thing I want to do is make sure I vary the sizes just to make sure we've got all of our calibers covered, if you will. And then I want to try and give it a couple of factory edges. Considering not all of it was hit by gunfire from the looks of it, we do want a few pieces that looked like they were still made by a machine, still have that nice beveled edge on them. And kind of want to make this a little bit more apparent, bring some more detail to it, and once we're done I'll hit it with a brush to get all of the dust and leftover pieces of plaster, and then we'll move on to basing it. So to do this, I've just got a couple of pieces of foam that I've cut up and this chipboard. This stuff is amazing. I use it for most of my terrain bases. I'll post a link, but it's really thick. It does a great job of not warping. And then we've got some Sculptamold and the remaining pieces of our wall, and then the wall itself, of course. So I'm just gonna move this stuff out of the way and start to position things on here. I've decided I want to keep it as straight as possible, right in the dead center. It really does work well with other pieces when you put them down on the table if they're not all cockeyed. Make it look like it was intentional when it was first built, even though it's ruined now. And just do a little bit of centering, make sure that you've got it exactly where you want it. I'll let you guys watch as I stand back and get a good eye on it. And then I'm just going to take some hot glue, apply it to the base of the wall, and push it down right where I want it. The hot glue does a phenomenal job with plaster. It seeps into all the little recesses and whatnot, and really does a good job of binding and keeping it steady. And then I'll move on to putting our foam down. You can see just a few dabs on the wall and the base. And then we'll slide our foam right on there. Mash, mash, mash. Make sure it's real tight. Move on to the other side. Do the same thing. Mash, mash, mash. Make sure it's real tight down on there. Give it a good once over. Got a little crack there, no problem at all. And before I put the rest of the stuff down, I just want to tear up this foam, obviously, make it look like it was manufactured at some point, but it's been sitting out here getting torn up. Take off these sharp edges. And to do this, I've just got this little hobby knife. It's actually a hobby saw I got on Amazon. I'll post a link to it in the description. But this thing works phenomenally for cutting foam especially. Just go through here, give it a couple more beveled edges, and you'll see me here in a second start to really give it some nice cracks and surface texture. One of my least favorite parts of working with foam is how much you have to touch it at the end of the day. The plaster does a really good job of providing its own texture, especially if you mold it like we did, but this stuff you've just got to cut into it so many times. It takes so long to get good realistic texture on it, so I try to use the foam sparingly. And turn around to the other side, do the same thing. Just some good cracks in here, little chips, a couple more for good measure, and yeah. Then we're going to start putting down the rest of our basing here. One of the biggest things I like to pay attention to is how these would naturally fall. So I'm just going to make sure that I've got them in the place I want them, and then put some hot glue on the bottom and stick them down. Again, hot glue and this chipboard works phenomenally. I have yet to have anything come off. And you can see there, I attempted to move it a little bit, but it was already too late. So I'll just put some glue on the bottom of the other one. And you'll see I noticed I have the wrong side put down, especially on the other one. The other one was really nice. and textured on the other side, but just didn't seem like it was going to look good. So I flipped it over, grab another little piece here on this side, make sure we got all those hot glue strings pulled away because they do not look great after you've painted them. And then we'll take a few of these little pebbles here, just the leftover crumbs from sculpting our wall, put them on here with some hot glue. Make sure we've got the right sizes. We don't want too big or they won't stick very well. They'll also look out of scale, so make sure you've got some little pieces, make sure they're on there well. And we'll just go around, fill in the rest of the bigger holes, doing the same thing. It's not the end of the world if you don't get them completely filled up. We're going to use the Sculpt-A-Mold here in a minute. I just wanted to make sure that I had all my holes filled. Ba-dum-tss. Alright, so let's move on to the Sculpt-A-Mold. Same process with the plaster, wet it down. It's not the end of the world if you use too much water. Too little water is never a good thing though. So we're just going to soak it really good, and then we'll start to mix it with our fingers. Really get in there and make sure this stuff is wetted thoroughly. It does not do well if you've got dry spots in it. But once we've mashed it up, this is about the texture we're going for. We want to be able to feel the lumps in it, while at the same time being able to manipulate it really well. So I'm just going to start smearing it on here. The terrain type I'm going for is a sandy base. So I'm going to do my best to keep it fluid. I don't want any sharp, jagged pieces sticking up, so really make sure to mash it all down good and get a flowy, water-like texture. Sand behaves like a fluid when wind is blown over it, so we want to make sure we keep it wavy and flowy. Got to get all the little areas. You don't want to leave anything undone. And then for a few spots, I want to make it look like we've got some variations in height on the ground. We don't want it to be all flat everywhere, so I'm just going to use the Sculpt-A-Mold to kind of build up the base in a couple of spots. And you'll see I just take a big piece, mash it down on the edges to really blend it in, and then we're going to run our finger over it to just kind of smooth out some of those areas. And then I'll move over to the other side. Sand, when it's blown, obviously is going to pile up from the direction that it's being blown, so just choosing a side here and really having that Sculpt-A-Mold piled up to give a nice sand effect. And once I've got that, I'm going to wet my finger down and I'm going to run it over all of this here to really bring it to a nice smooth consistency and texture on top. We'll be adding some sand in the next step, so this is really just for elevation. Just make sure it's nice and smooth, get all the nooks and crannies. We don't want any spot of jagged terrain sticking up through the sand. So I'll just clean up the edges with my knife, and once it's dry, move on to wood gluing. You don't need too much glue for this step, especially initially. We'll just add a little water at first. Grab a brush we don't care about. I'm pretty sure I got this brush from Home Depot for like 50 cents. So these are my go-to when doing anything glue related. And again, we just want to make sure that we've got a nice thin mixture. Too thick will leave runs, and we want to start applying it. The most important thing at this step is to make sure you don't oversaturate it. Getting too much water on that base will make it warp, and that is something we want to stay away from. It looks terrible in my opinion when they don't sit flat on the table, so just being really sparingly, brush this stuff around, make sure that we don't let it sit or pile up in one spot, and then we'll grab some of the sand. This is a mixture of play sand and some of these small gray rocks I got on Amazon. I'll post a link. But we're just going to take this and sprinkle it around. We'll also be using a textured basing paste later, so I'm not too worried about full and complete coverage. Just want to make sure that we've got a nice textured layer over our glue. Put some on the foam here. Knock it off if we've got too much. And tap it all away. Now, before that dries, I want to take some water, just like we did with the Sculptamold, put it on my finger, and rub all of the areas that got sand that didn't need them. And we'll just rub away until that glue has come off, or at least the sand itself, and then we'll move on to brushing the wall down. You really want to make sure to get it in all of the little bullet holes and whatnot. They won't take paint nearly as well if you don't, so be sure to take your time. Wet the mixture down if you need to. It's going to do a lot better, and you can do multiple coats. Just make sure I get all of my little pieces on the base too, and then start dabbing. If you notice that your mixture is running or it's a little too thick, you can come back in with just some water itself and dab over the top to thin it down. We really don't want to take out that detail, and letting this glue build up will in fact steal a lot of your detail, if you will. So make sure you've got some but not too much. Make sure you don't have any runs, and make sure you dab all of the exposed parts so that they look nice and even. Alright, so here it is all dried up. I really love the way these things come out. I love the plaster. I love how chunky it feels while at the same time being pretty light. And as you can see, our base managed to stay straight. And that's going to wrap it up for this video. Join me next time where we get this thing painted and ready for the tabletop.